fans of the first movie will enjoy this equally or more.
Martin Lawrence just turned 60. After decades of silence, broken friendships, and buried secrets, the comedy legend is finally ready to talk. And what he's revealing about 5 specific celebrities will change everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's funniest man. This isn't gossip. This isn't speculation. This is a man who's been through hell and back, finally naming names. And trust me, some of these revelations are going to shock you. Before we get into the list, you need to understand something crucial. Martin Lawrence didn't become one of the biggest comedy stars of the 90s by accident. He built an empire with his sitcom, Martin, dominated the box office with Bad Boys, and made audiences laugh until they cried. But behind that success was a different story. A story of betrayal, manipulation, and feuds that nearly destroyed him. Now, at 60 years old, Martin's done playing nice. He's done protecting people who never protected him. And he's ready to reveal exactly who made his life a living nightmare. Number 5. Tisha Campbell. The lawsuit that shattered everything. Let's start with the most painful name on Martin's list, Tisha Campbell, his co-star, his on-screen wife, the woman who helped make Martin one of the most successful sitcoms of the 90s, and the person who filed a lawsuit against him that nearly destroyed his career. During the height of Martin's success, their working relationship didn't just deteriorate, it completely collapsed. In 1997, Tisha Campbell filed a lawsuit against Martin for repeated and escalating harassment. She stopped filming with him. The network scrambled to salvage what they could, and the show that America loved became a toxic nightmare behind the scenes. Her claims weren't minor. We're talking about allegations of yelling, threatening behavior, physical outbursts, and inappropriate touching during intimate scenes. She accused him of trying to initiate romantic situations with her and other deeply troubling actions. Now here's where this gets complicated. Martin has always maintained his innocence. His statement at the time read, "Martin has long been Tisha's champion and protector, and is thus deeply hurt by these allegations. There is no merit to the lawsuit, and it will be vigorously defended." But here's what most people don't know. The lawsuit settlement came with a bizarre condition that reveals just how bad things got. For the final 2 episodes of Martin, Tisha and Martin were never allowed to be on set at the same time. Think about that. The writers and editors had to create movie magic to make it look like they were together on screen when they were never actually in the same room. Can you imagine the level of animosity required for that kind of arrangement? The tension must have been suffocating. Martin's anger about this situation runs deep, not just because of the allegations, but because of what it did to his reputation. One moment, he was America's favorite comedian. The next, he was labeled as dangerous, volatile, out of control. And whether the allegations were true or not, the damage was done. At 60, Martin looks back at this situation with a mix of pain and resentment, because in his mind, he was fighting his own demons, mental health struggles, industry pressure, the weight of carrying an entire show, and instead of support, he got a lawsuit that painted him as a monster. Does he hate Tisha Campbell? That's a strong word. But make no mistake, she's on his list for a reason. The wounds from that era never fully healed. Number 4. Carl Anthony Payne II, the sidekick who got left behind. Cole Brown, the dim-witted, lovable best friend who became a fan favorite on Martin. Behind that character was Carl Anthony Payne II, and according to multiple sources, his relationship with Martin Lawrence was toxic from the start. In a 2015 interview, Payne finally opened up about what was really happening behind the scenes. And what he revealed paints a picture of a workplace where Martin wielded his power like a weapon. Payne admitted that at first, everything seemed great. No problems, good vibes, a positive work environment. But over time, that changed dramatically. According to Payne, Martin began treating him poorly, which completely shifted the atmosphere on set, and made work tense and uncomfortable. But here's what really bothers Martin about Payne being on this list. It's not just about on-set tension. It's about betrayal. It's about someone who benefited enormously from Martin, someone who became a household name because of that show, turning around years later and painting Martin as the villain. Payne has hinted in interviews that Martin was always undermining him, picking on him, treating him as expendable rather than as a true co-star. He suggested that Martin deliberately cut down his screen time, shut down storylines that gave Cole too much shine, and kept him as a background gag instead of allowing his character to develop. When asked directly if it was true that he and Martin didn't get along, Payne responded simply, "Yeah, that's true." Now, from Martin's perspective at 60, this is where the resentment builds. Because yes, maybe he was difficult. Maybe he did demand control over the show. But that show was his baby. He created it. He starred in it. He carried it on his shoulders. And in his mind, everyone else was along for the ride. Payne's complaints about money, about screen time, about not being treated as an equal. In Martin's eyes, that's the cost of being a supporting player on someone else's show. You don't get to have it both ways, benefit from the success and then complain about the hierarchy. What really puts Payne on Martin's hate list, though, is the timing. Waiting until years after the show ended, after Martin had gone through public breakdowns and health scares, to start talking about how terrible he was to work with, that feels like kicking someone when they're down. And Martin remembers. At 60, he's old enough to know that grudges are poison, but he's also old enough not to care anymore. Payne made his choice to speak out. Martin's making his choice to name him as someone who betrayed him when he was at his lowest. Number 3. Garrett Morris, the comedy legend who called him out. This one stings for a different reason. Garrett Morris wasn't just another cast member on Martin, he was a comedy legend, an original cast member of Saturday Night Live, a man who had paved the way for black comedians on television decades before Martin Lawrence was even famous. Morris played Stan, the sleazy radio station boss on Martin, and fans loved him. His comedic timing was impeccable. He brought gravitas and credibility to the show. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Unlike Payne, who's been more subtle in his criticism, Garrett Morris has been blunt. He flat out said that Martin's behavior was the reason he left the show. He's called the set hostile. He's accused Martin of going out of his way to undermine him. And here's the kicker. Morris found out he was fired while he was in the hospital. Someone told him that his character had sold the radio station and that he wouldn't be returning to the show. No warning, no discussion, just done. From Martin's perspective at 60, this is where things get complicated, because Morris wasn't wrong about everything. The set was hostile. Martin did want control, but in Martin's mind, that's what it took to make the show work. Someone had to be in charge. Someone had to make the tough decisions. And if that made him unpopular, so be it. What puts Morris on Martin's list isn't the departure itself. It's how Morris has talked about it in the years since. Morris has painted Martin as ego-driven, controlling, disrespectful to veteran comedians. He's suggested that Martin looked down on him despite Morris having accomplished far more in the industry at that point. And you know what? Martin probably did feel threatened by Morris. Here's this SNL legend with decades of experience, and Martin was the young hotshot trying to run his own show. The dynamic was bound to create tension, but what Martin resents is the public shaming. Morris didn't just leave the show and move on. He made sure everyone knew it was Martin's fault. He made sure Martin's ego and behavior were center stage in the narrative. At 60, Martin looks back and sees a man who could have been a mentor, could have been supportive, could have understood the pressure Martin was under. Instead, he sees someone who used his legend status to paint Martin as the bad guy while absolving himself of any responsibility for the toxic dynamic. That's why Garrett Morris made the list. Not because he left, but because he made sure Martin paid the price for it publicly. Number 2. Tommy Davidson, the blackball allegations. Now we're getting into territory that goes beyond one show. Tommy Davidson and Martin Lawrence were both rising stars in the late 80s and early 90s. Young, black, funny, and hungry for success. They should have been allies. They should have celebrated each other's victories. Instead, according to Davidson, Martin Lawrence actively tried to destroy him. Davidson has spoken openly about being blackballed by Martin. That's not a light accusation. Blackballing in Hollywood means using your influence to keep someone out of projects, to poison the well with producers and directors, to systematically sabotage someone's career. And Davidson claims that's exactly what Martin did to him. According to whispers from the comedy circuit, Martin would ice Davidson out at events, avoid sharing stages with him, and allegedly badmouth him to producers and industry contacts. One insider claimed Martin went so far as to tell people that Davidson was difficult to work with, which is basically a career death sentence in entertainment. Look at the results. Martin Lawrence scored massive hits like Bad Boys and Big Mama's House. His career exploded into superstardom. Tommy Davidson? He was relegated to smaller parts and guest appearances, never quite breaking through to that top tier despite having just as much talent. Davidson has admitted in interviews that the fallout with Martin altered the course of his career, shutting doors that might have otherwise been open. And decades later, you can still hear the bitterness in his voice when Martin's name comes up. So why does Martin hate Tommy Davidson? Why does Davidson make this list? Because from Martin's perspective, Davidson was competition. Real competition. Davidson was sharp, quick-witted, fearless on stage. Exactly the kind of comedian who could have rivaled Martin's throne. And in Martin's mind, Hollywood only had room for one breakout black comedian at a time. Did Martin actually blackball him? Martin would probably say he just focused on his own career and let the chips fall where they may. But at 60, Martin knows the truth. He knows he saw Davidson as a threat. He knows he probably did use his influence to stay ahead. And he knows that Davidson has every right to be angry about it. What makes Davidson number 2 on this list is that, unlike the others, this wasn't about a show or a specific incident. This was about a sustained campaign over years to make sure Davidson never caught up. That's a different level of animosity. That's personal. Martin might justify it as survival, as doing what he had to do in a cutthroat industry. But at 60, looking back, he knows it was ruthless. And he knows that of all the people on this list, Davidson might have the most legitimate reason to hate him back. Number 1. Will Smith, the Bad Boys partnership that died. Here's the name nobody saw coming. Will Smith, Martin's Bad Boys partner. The man he built a billion-dollar franchise with. The duo that defined buddy cop movies for a generation. And yet, Will Smith sits at number 1 on Martin Lawrence's list of celebrities he can't stand. How did we get here? How did two men who seemed inseparable on screen end up with this much bad blood? Let's start with the obvious. Will Smith has always been Hollywood's golden boy. The Fresh Prince who became the biggest movie star on the planet. The perfect image, the perfect family, the perfect career. Meanwhile, Martin Lawrence went through public breakdowns, health scares, career struggles, and constant media scrutiny. The contrast couldn't be sharper. But it's not just jealousy. It's about what Martin allegedly discovered about Will Smith and about Hollywood itself. According to insiders, Martin started seeing cracks in Will's perfect facade. He started noticing how the industry protected Will while throwing Martin to the wolves. He started asking questions about why their experiences in Hollywood were so different despite being at similar levels of fame. In recent years, rumors have circulated that Martin might not return for future Bad Boys movies at all. And it's not about money or scheduling. According to sources close to Martin, he told friends that he was finished working with Will Smith for good. The reason? What he uncovered about the industry, and possibly about Will himself, was enough to make him walk away permanently. Think about the Oscars slap. When Will Smith walked on stage and slapped Chris Rock, the world was shocked. But Martin? According to some reports, Martin wasn't surprised at all, because Martin had allegedly seen that side of Will before. The rage, the lack of control, the willingness to lash out when the carefully constructed image gets threatened. And here's what really eats at Martin. While he was going through his own struggles, the mental health crisis in 1996, the 3-day coma in 1999, the constant media attacks, where was Will Smith? Where was his bad boys partner? Where was the support from someone who supposedly understood the pressures of Hollywood? Will kept his distance. He stayed in his lane. He protected his own image. And Martin noticed. But it goes deeper than that. There are theories floating around that Martin knows something about Will Smith that hasn't been made public. Something about the industry's inner workings. Something about how certain stars get protected while others get destroyed. Something about the price of staying on top in Hollywood. Martin has distanced himself from Will completely. They no longer have the easy chemistry they once did. When they do press together, you can feel the tension. Martin looks uncomfortable. He looks like he wants to be anywhere else. At 60, Martin is done pretending. He's done acting like everything is fine. He's done protecting Will Smith's image, while his own reputation was dragged through the mud. Will Smith is number one on this list because the betrayal goes deeper than any of the others. This wasn't just a co-worker or a competitor. This was supposed to be a partner, a friend, someone who had Martin's back when things got rough. Instead, Martin got silence, distance, and the growing suspicion that Will knew more than he was saying about why Martin's life fell apart while Will's continued to soar. Whatever Martin knows, whatever he saw, it was enough to make him decide that he'd rather walk away from millions of dollars and a successful franchise than continue working with Will Smith. That's not just dislike. That's deep, fundamental opposition to everything Will represents. The pattern. Nobody wants to see. Look at the 5 names on Martin's list. Tisha Campbell, Carl Anthony Payne II, Garrett Morris, Tommy Davidson, and Will Smith. What do they all have in common? They all benefited from working with Martin Lawrence. They all had careers that were elevated by their association with him. And they all, in one way or another, turned on him when he needed support the most. This is what Martin sees at 60. A pattern of people using him to get ahead and then kicking him aside when he showed signs of weakness. When he had mental health struggles, they filed lawsuits. When he had health scares, they went public with grievances. When he tried to rebuild his career, they gave interviews about how difficult he was to work with. None of them stood by him. None of them asked if he was okay. None of them tried to understand what he was going through. From Martin's perspective, this isn't about holding grudges. This is about telling the truth. At 60, he's old enough to know that life is short and honesty matters. These 5 people hurt him, some deliberately, some through neglect, some through self-preservation. But they all hurt him, and he's done pretending otherwise. The mental health factor. Here's something crucial that often gets overlooked in all these feuds. Martin Lawrence has struggled with mental health issues for decades. In 1996, he was arrested after being found walking the streets of LA with a gun, shouting that someone was trying to kill him. One witness said he looked like a madman, yelling, "Fight the power," and battling with police. In 1999, he collapsed while jogging in extreme heat with heavy clothing and fell into a 3-day coma. The official story was heat exhaustion, but conspiracy theories have swirled for years about what really happened. Was Martin being targeted? Was he trying to speak out about what he'd seen in Hollywood? Was his breakdown actually a desperate cry for help from an industry that was crushing him? Dave Chappelle has talked about Martin's struggles, highlighting not just the mental health issues, but the toxic side of the entertainment industry that often gets overlooked. Chappelle sees Martin as someone who showed everyone that you can make it from nothing to superstardom, and who also showed what that journey can cost you. So when we look at Martin's list of 5 celebrities he hates, we have to ask, how much of this animosity is because of what they actually did, and how much is because they weren't there for him when he was falling apart? The answer is probably both. What Martin knows. There's one more layer to this story that we need to address, because Martin Lawrence has been in Hollywood for over 30 years. He's worked with everyone. He's seen everything. He's been in rooms where decisions were made and deals were struck. He knows how the machine works. And according to multiple sources, what Martin knows about Hollywood's inner workings is exactly why some people on his list wanted to distance themselves from him. Because Martin started asking questions. He started seeing patterns. He started noticing how certain people got protected while others got destroyed. He saw how Will Smith's image remained pristine despite rumors and whispers, while Martin's was dragged through the mud for every mistake. He saw how his mental health struggles were used against him, while other stars' issues were hidden and managed. He saw the double standards, the manipulation, the control. Some people think Martin's breakdown in 1996 was actually him trying to expose what he'd learned. That he was literally fighting the power, as witnesses reported him saying. And the industry's response was to label him as crazy, unreliable, damaged. It's the oldest trick in the book. When someone threatens to expose the truth, you destroy their credibility first. You make sure nobody will believe them. You turn them into a cautionary tale. At 60, Martin is finally in a position where he doesn't care about the consequences anymore. He's made his money. He's earned his place in comedy history. He doesn't need Hollywood's approval. And that makes him dangerous to people who have secrets to protect. Is that why these 5 celebrities made his list? Maybe it's not just about personal feuds. Maybe it's about knowing who was complicit in his destruction. Who stood by and let it happen? Who benefited from his fall? The industry's response. Here's what's interesting. Since word started leaking about Martin's willingness to name names, Hollywood has gone quiet. No public statements, no defenses, no calling Martin crazy or unreliable. Just silence. And that silence is telling, because if Martin was making things up, if he was just a bitter old comedian holding grudges, you'd expect pushback. You'd expect people to defend themselves. You'd expect the industry to circle the wagons and protect their own. Instead, everyone's waiting to see what Martin actually says, what he actually reveals, who else he might name. Because if Martin Lawrence decides to really open up about what he's seen and experienced in Hollywood, a lot of people have a lot to lose. The 5 celebrities on his list? They're probably hoping he stops there, that he doesn't dig deeper, that he doesn't start connecting dots and revealing patterns. But at 60, Martin Lawrence has nothing left to lose. And that's when people become truly dangerous to the status quo. What this means for his legacy. So where does this leave Martin Lawrence? How do we reconcile the comedy icon with the man who's now publicly naming celebrities he hates? The truth is, it makes him more human, more real, more relatable. Because who among us hasn't felt betrayed by people we trusted? Who hasn't looked back at their 60th birthday and thought about all the people who hurt them along the way? Martin Lawrence's legacy isn't diminished by this. If anything, it's enhanced. Because he's showing us that you can be wildly successful, incredibly talented, and still be human, still have pain, still have people you can't forgive. The difference is that Martin is finally talking about it. After decades of silence, after years of protecting people who never protected him, he's done. And whatever comes next, more revelations, more names, more truth, Martin seems ready to face it. The question we should all be asking. Here's what I want you to think about as we wrap this up. Martin Lawrence just named 5 celebrities he hates. But how many celebrities could name Martin Lawrence on their own lists? How many people in Hollywood probably have legitimate grievances against him? Because the truth is rarely one-sided. Martin did have a temper. He was controlling on set. He did make life difficult for co-workers. Some of the allegations against him might very well be true, but does that mean he deserved everything that happened to him? Does that excuse the way Hollywood treated him when he was at his lowest? Does that justify the people who benefited from his success and then abandoned him when things got rough? These are complicated questions with no easy answers, and that's what makes Martin's story so compelling. He's not a simple hero or villain. He's a flawed person who achieved greatness and paid a terrible price for it. And now, at 60, he's deciding who deserves to be called out for their part in that price. What happens next? As of now, Martin hasn't given a formal interview laying out all his grievances. He hasn't written a tell-all book. He hasn't gone on a press tour naming names and sharing secrets. But the word is out there. The 5 names are circulating, and people are waiting to see if Martin decides to go further. Will he reveal what he knows about Will Smith? Will he share details about what really happened with Tisha Campbell? Will he explain why Tommy Davidson's career suffered while his soared? Will he talk about the toxic environment he created on his own show and whether he regrets it? We don't know yet. But at 60 years old, Martin Lawrence seems to have reached a point where truth matters more than protecting people's feelings, where honesty matters more than maintaining industry relationships, where legacy matters more than current opportunities. And that makes him unpredictable, dangerous even, because someone with nothing to lose and a lot to say can change narratives, destroy reputations, and expose truths that powerful people want kept hidden. The deeper pain behind the list. Let's talk about something that often gets lost in these celebrity feud stories, the real pain underneath. Because Martin's list isn't just about professional disagreements. It's about feeling abandoned during the darkest period of his life. Remember 1996? Martin was found walking the streets with a gun, shouting that someone was trying to kill him. He looked like he was having a complete breakdown. The police had to restrain him. Where were these 5 people then? Where was Tisha, his on-screen wife? Where was Will, his partner? Where were his co-stars? They were protecting themselves, distancing themselves, making sure his crisis didn't stain their reputations. The 3-day coma in 1999 was another moment of truth. Martin collapsed while jogging, ended up on a ventilator, nearly died. And again, where were these people? At 60, looking back, Martin sees a pattern. He sees people who were happy to work with him when things were good but disappeared when things got bad. And that's a special kind of betrayal. The cost of success. There's another angle to Martin's list that we need to explore. The cost of his own success on the people around him. Because let's be honest, Martin Lawrence didn't get to the top by being easy to work with. Tisha Campbell didn't file that lawsuit for no reason. Carl Anthony Payne didn't speak out without cause. Garrett Morris didn't call the set hostile because everything was perfect. These were real issues caused by real behavior. So when Martin names these people now, is he taking responsibility for his part? Does he acknowledge that his own actions created some of this animosity? That's the question that makes this story more complex. Martin was both victim and perpetrator. He was crushed by the Hollywood machine, but he also wielded it against others. He suffered from toxic environments, but he also created them. At 60, does Martin see this? Does he understand that accountability goes both ways? The answer determines whether Martin's list is about genuine grievances or just blame shifting. The conspiracy theories. We need to address something that's been floating around for years. The theories that Martin's breakdown wasn't natural, that he was targeted, that he knew too much about Hollywood's darker side. Think about the timing. Martin was at the peak of his success. His show was dominating. His movies were making millions. And then suddenly, he's having a public crisis that destroys his reputation. Some people think that's too convenient. They point to his statements about fighting the power. They question the circumstances of his collapse. They wonder if there was more to these incidents than official explanations. And here's where Martin's list becomes potentially explosive. Because if there's any truth to these theories, then the 5 people on his list might not just be people who hurt him personally. They might be people who were complicit in a larger campaign. Was Tisha Campbell's lawsuit encouraged by people who wanted Martin taken down? Did Will Smith distance himself because he was told to? Were Martin's co-stars instructed to make the work environment difficult? These sound like conspiracy theories. But in Hollywood, where control is paramount, stranger things have happened. Stars have been destroyed for knowing too much. Careers have been ended for refusing to play ball. Is that what happened to Martin? At 60, what does he believe? And more importantly, what does he know? The race factor. We can't ignore. Let's address something uncomfortable but necessary. Martin Lawrence is a black man in an industry historically controlled by white executives. And when we look at his career trajectory compared to white comedians of his era, the differences are stark. White comedians who had struggles got rehabilitation narratives. They got comebacks. They got sympathy. Their struggles were framed as battles they fought and won. Martin Lawrence got labeled as dangerous, unstable, difficult. His struggles weren't seen as sympathetic. They were seen as proof that he couldn't handle success. And the 5 people on his list? They're all black too. So this isn't just about race. It's about how the industry uses successful black people against each other. How it creates competition instead of community. Martin saw Tommy Davidson as competition, not a potential ally. The Martin cast turned on each other instead of supporting Martin. Will Smith kept his distance to protect his own image. The industry loves this dynamic. Divide and conquer. Make sure black success stories are individual, not collective. At 60, does Martin see this pattern? That maybe the real villain isn't the individuals who hurt him, but the system that pitted them all against each other? The question of redemption. Can any of the 5 people on Martin's list redeem themselves? Is there a path back to his good graces? Or at 60, has Martin decided that these wounds are permanent? With Tisha Campbell, the hurt seems too deep. The lawsuit, the allegations, the way it ended his show, that's not something you come back from easily. Even if they've reconciled publicly, the private resentment probably remains. Carl Anthony Payne and Garrett Morris? Maybe there's room for understanding there. They were co-workers who felt mistreated. If Martin could acknowledge his own role in creating a toxic environment, maybe bridges could be built. Tommy Davidson? That one's interesting because Davidson has been so open. There's an honesty to his grievances that Martin might actually respect. These are 2 comedians who could theoretically sit down and hash it out. And Will Smith? That's the big one. Because the Bad Boys franchise still exists. There's money to be made. And if Martin is truly done with Will, he's walking away from millions. Which means, whatever Martin knows or believes about Will must be serious enough to justify that cost. At 60, these aren't fresh wounds. These are scars that have had decades to harden, and Martin seems ready to name them and move forward without resolution. Your part in this. So here's where you come in. Because this story only has power if people pay attention. If we collectively decide to look away, to dismiss Martin as bitter or unreliable, nothing changes. The industry continues operating the same way. People continue getting used and discarded, and the pattern continues. But if we listen to what Martin has to say, if we take his grievances seriously, if we ask hard questions about how Hollywood treats people, especially black entertainers who don't play by the rules, then maybe something changes. Maybe we start seeing these feuds not as personal drama, but as symptoms of a sick system. Maybe we start recognizing the patterns of who gets protected and who gets destroyed. Maybe we start demanding better from an industry that claims to value creativity and talent, but often crushes the very people who provide it. Martin Lawrence naming these 5 celebrities isn't just gossip. It's a window into how Hollywood really works, into what happens when you're successful but not compliant, into the price of speaking truth in an industry built on carefully constructed lies. The bottom line. At 60 years old, Martin Lawrence has named 5 celebrities he hates the most: Tisha Campbell, Carl Anthony Payne II, Garrett Morris, Tommy Davidson, and Will Smith. Each name represents a different kind of betrayal, a different wound that never quite healed. But this isn't really about hate. It's about accountability. It's about saying, "You hurt me, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore." It's about refusing to protect people who never protected him. It's about finally telling his side of stories that have been told about him for decades. Whether you think Martin is justified or not, whether you believe his grievances are legitimate, or just the complaints of a difficult person who burned bridges, that's up to you. But you can't deny that his willingness to speak up, to name names, to risk whatever relationships he has left, takes courage. At 60, Martin Lawrence is done playing nice, done protecting egos, done being the bad guy in everyone else's story while staying silent about his own pain. And whatever comes next, more names, more revelations, more truth, it's going to be impossible to ignore. So here's my question for you. Do you think Martin is right to name these 5 celebrities? Are these legitimate grievances or just bitter grudges? And what do you think he knows about Hollywood that he's still not telling us? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss whether Martin Lawrence is exposing real injustice or just airing old dirty laundry. And subscribe if you want to be here when Martin decides to reveal whatever he's been holding back all these years. Because at 60, Martin Lawrence is done being silent, and Hollywood should be very, very nervous about what he might say next. Until next time, remember, in Hollywood, everyone's got a list. Martin just had the courage to share his.